Welcome to Enabling Contained Databases. Contained databases are introduced in SQL Server 2012, and they require enabling before you can actually use them. Before you can use a contained database, you have to first enable it at the instance level using either SQL Server Management Studio or the spconfigure system stored procedure. Once you've turned on the enabling of contained logins at the instance level, you can then configure a database as being partially contained. We don't have fully contained database in this release of SQL Server. We're expecting that in a future release. To set a database as partially contained, again, we can either use SQL Server Management Studio or the alter database tsql statement. Let's go ahead and show how to do this using SQL Server 2012. As you can see here, I'm connected to a SQL Server 2012 instance. You can tell what version the instance is on by either looking at the version number in the Object Explorer, in the Object Explorer details, or down here at the bottom in the details pane. To enable contained databases at the instance level, we go to the properties of the instance, and we look at the Advanced tab. Containment is actually going to be right here at the top. By default, it will be disabled. Before we can enable database containment at the database level, we have to turn it on at the instance level. This is to prevent people who are database owner of a database from creating contained databases without the system owner knowing about it. So to make this change, we simply select True in this drop-down menu and then click OK. Optionally, we can use the spconfigure script to make this change as well. To do this, we use spconfigure, set contained database authentication to 1, and do a reconfigure with override. That will allow us to use contained databases without having to restart the instance. So let's go ahead and run that, enabling contained database authentication on our instance. We can now take our sample database and bring up the properties for that database. We can now set this database as a contained database. We do this on the Options tab of the database properties, setting the containment type from none to partial. You'll notice there's no full containment option available because that's not available in SQL Server 2012. We select partial containment, and we get a few other options now. Under the containment section within the database, we now get default full text language. That's going to be 1033, which is going to be US English. Default language is English. Nested triggers are enabled or disabled. Transform noise words, which is a full text setting, and the 2-digit year cutoff. With database containment turned off for this database, these options are not required because we would simply pull these options from the instance level. But because we're now going to be a contained database, we need to set these options specifically within the database. So if we needed to set a different language for this specific contained database, we could do that. For example, setting it to French, simply by selecting from this drop-down menu what language we wanted. We can either click OK, or again, we can script this out and see what the tsql itself is going to look like. As you can see, the alter database script, fairly simple. We're just doing an alter database, specifying the name of the database, setting the containment equal to partial. In this case, we're specifying with no wait. That's simply telling the SQL Server Database Engine to simply run the script and not wait for anybody else to complete. We could also execute this without the no wait statement, and SQL Server would execute this statement waiting for any other users who are logged onto the system to complete before completing this transaction. If we go ahead and execute that, we'll see the database containment type is then changed. We can verify this by looking at the database properties. We see that the containment type is now set to partial. We can now use the contained database features within the SQL Server database. So in summary, we've seen that database containment is fairly easy to enable. There are two settings that have to be enabled, both at the instance level and at the database level. The instance level only needs to be enabled once for the entire instance, while the database level setting needs to be enabled for each contained database that you want on that instance. Now, if the instance level setting is not enabled, and you tried to restore a contained database to the SQL Server instance, the database will not restore, and it will return an error message saying that contained databases are not supported on that instance.